Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is well, staying warm. I'm in the Pittsburgh region, and so it's cold here, and there's snow on the ground. If you don't mind putting in the chat where you're from, if you're from the PHRC, what region you're from, what role you're from. And so we just want to welcome everyone to our final Lunch and Learn. It happens to have folded over into the month of January, and the title of our Lunch and Learn today is Navigating a Multi-Generational Workplace. And we have attorney Morgan C. Davis Edwards, and we're so glad that she's here with us today. Before we continue, we have a message from our executive director, Chad D. Lassiter, who's unable to be with us today, but he wanted to make sure that he sends a virtual beloved community welcome to the team and to everyone who's on today, and also wanted to make sure that he gives this quote that says, "Never to forget where we came from and always praise the bridges that carried us over." And that's a quote from Fannie Lou Hamer. So thank you for that, Chad D. Lassiter. We wish you were with us today, but we are so glad for everyone who's here with us. And before we go, we always want to make sure that we say the bio of who we have with us. And we're so glad to have attorney Morgan C. Davis Edwards with us. So I'm going to say her name and say her bio. So Morgan C. Davis Edwards began her career with OGC in June 2016 as an assistant counsel with the Pennsylvania Parole Board. Morgan currently represents the board in claims in state and federal courts and administrative tribunals. Morgan also serves as the Right to Know Law legal liaison, where she represents the board before the Commonwealth's Office of Open Records and the Commonwealth's appellate courts. She also provides legal training to state parole agents from across the Commonwealth. Prior to the employment with OGC, Morgan was an attorney at the law of Siliker and Reinhold in Harrisburg, PA, where she focused her practice on family law, wills, and estates. Morgan is admitted practice before the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania and the United States District Courts of Eastern, the Middle, and Western Districts of Pennsylvania. Morgan is a 2011 graduate of the University of Pittsburgh, where she received the BS in marketing and a certificate in leadership and ethics. She received her Juris Doctor from Widener University School of Law, which is the Harrisburg campus, where she served on the Dean's Diversity Council for several years. Morgan is a co-chair of the board's mentorship, a member of the OGC hiring committee, and also serves as a mediator in the OGC mediation program. And I have to say that during my conversations with attorney Edwards, it has been invigorating. And I think that the conversation that we're going to have today, you'll feel the same way. So please give a Lunch and Learn welcome to attorney Davis Morgan this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to thank the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission and Anita for working with me and inviting me to even present today. I'm honored to be here. So, can you guys see and hear me? Because I keep getting like random freezing and pausing. We good, Anita? Okay, awesome. So I think what's kind of sparked this conversation, I initially did a similar presentation for the Pennsylvania Commonwealth's Diversity, Equity, Belonging, and Inclusion Committee. And for me, what kind of sparked this initial topic was throughout my workforce development, so to speak, I've had the opportunity to both work with people of various generations and backgrounds, and then supervise individuals older and younger than me. So as this has come to fruition, it's really sparked a lot of interest in me in really figuring out how we should work together in a workplace that is multi-generational. And a little bit later, I'll tell you kind of the uncomfortable situation that really led me to trying to understand and focus in on like, well, how can we make this a better situation? But I think it's a unique time that we're all living in. So for the first time in history, you can have up to 5 generations working in the workplace at one time. And each generation brings a different set of unique experiences, ideas, backgrounds, overall just experience, life experience even to the table, that I think it's really, really such a blessing and a benefit for for us to have the opportunity to tap into each generation while we're working, and it can really foster some really genius collaboration. And ultimately, it can lead to organizations working better. And I think it makes us better as people. And so generational diversity is something that we really have to embrace. Even though for some people, the idea of it could be a little uncomfortable or even kind of uneasy because you're working with people that are very different from you. And I think oftentimes we think of diversity as maybe things that you know, ethnic backgrounds, nationality, race. But when you add age into that, it's another level that can also, it's a huge benefit, I think, to embrace the organizations that can embrace generational diversity in the workplace. So one reference that I like to really pull from that I think is a good example, I don't know if anyone has seen the movie The Intern with Robert De Niro. Well, in that movie, Robert De Niro is a 70-year-old intern who returns to, after working for 50 years, decides to go work as an intern in a senior internship program at a company that is run by a very young CEO who's about 30 years old at the time. So when you see him go back into this workplace, he doesn't even know how to turn on a computer. He had actually worked for a newspaper printing company, right? And he's in this company now that does online retail sales. And in the company, he's working with individuals who are like, I've never even seen or read a newspaper. So throughout the movie, you're really watching how he brings what he has garnered as someone from an older generation and the work ethic and kind of principles that he's learned and gained. And he's met with this younger generation. The first day of work, he shows up in like a 3-piece suit, and he's sitting at a shared desk with a individual who's wearing a hoodie and sweatpants, right? And they're kind of looking at each other, puzzled, like, you know, well, where are you going? We're at the same place. But it's really, it's a very endearing movie. And you see throughout the movie how Robert De Niro's perspectives from being a boomer, really, he starts to mentor these younger individuals unconsciously, so to speak, through life experiences. Even they want to change how they dress. But on the other side of it, you see them influencing him, teaching him to be maybe a little bit more laid back. You know, you don't always have to come to work in a suit. You can enjoy and have fun at the workplace too. It doesn't always have to be a serious thing. So I think that movie really shows kind of how we can interplay on one another as different generations and how that can really be a positive experience. So I think when we're looking over generation, the definition of career has vastly changed from generation to generation. What does a career look like to someone who's a baby boomer versus someone who's of Generation Z? So I'm going to break down, as you see on the screen, we're going to break down the different generations. I'm going to do like a brief overview and talk about who encompasses each generation and kind of like some basic characteristics that fit into those categories. So first, you have your traditionalist generation, who is also often called the silent generation. Those are individuals born between 1925 and 1945. So their ages range from like 78 to 100. Now, while that might seem like we really could be working in a place with someone that's of that generation, it's very possible at this stage and age. You often see individuals who have retired and have gone back to work in some aspect, maybe out of necessity, financial necessity, or just out of an aspect of, my grandmother used to always say, I think if I don't work, I'm gonna die, you know? So it's like you go back to work with the aspect of feeling like you need to constantly do something. So we do see these individuals that are still in our workforce, in our workplace, whether you're working with them directly or whether you're seeing them in another aspect, whether they've retired and returned to work part-time at a retail store or doing some other capacity. Then you have your baby boomer generation, 1946 to 1964. These are individuals ages 61 to 78. So they are optimistic, they're competitive, their work can be perceived as workaholics even. They're committed to their work and to their jobs. You see a great sense of loyalty with the baby boomer generation. This is the generation that built their career from probably one place and stayed there throughout their career. They value face-to-face interactions. They love a collaborative approach, and they really value respect and tradition. So this is going to be, for me, this is my parents' generation. So I am familiar with, you know, kind of how they think of life or how they view life. Both of them each spent over 25 years with working for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So that that shows the loyalty and commitment they have to working in one, one organization. Then you go into Generation X. These are individuals born from 1965 to 1980, ages 45 to 60. They're flexible. They're a little bit more informal. They're motivated. This was a generation that really introduced the concept of work-life balance. This is really what they valued, more so at the time than maybe financial success. They really appreciated the work-life balance because you saw a lot more women entering the workforce in this generation. So the work-life balance was very important. More self-directed, and they're maybe less collaborative. They value their autonomy and independence. And for them, communication, the best type of communication is whatever is most efficient. Whatever is going to get the job done is kind of where they land in that generation. And then we move on to millennials. This is my generation. We're a tortured generation. But very complicated, but we're competitive, civic, and open-minded. We're very achievement-oriented, motivated by responsibility, personal and professional development, and we value autonomy. And then Generation Z, this is the tech generation. They're global, entrepreneurship, progressive. This is a generation you see that has career choice of content creator, right? So like these are individuals that don't know a world without the internet or a world without a cell phone. They're motivated by diversity, individuality, creativity, self-expression. They love fast communication, things that they can access at their fingertips. The age of an encyclopedia is foreign to them, right? So this is a different, they're working with a different means of information gaining and information sharing. They value opportunities where they can really think outside the box. So that's that generation. And so those are, you see the differences just on the surface of how those generations are at play. So we have some poll questions that I've asked Anita to filter into our presentation. So that takes us to our first poll question. Which generation category do you fall in? So Anita's going to share that, and then I should populate some results here.
Interesting. Mhm.
I can't see the results, Anita. Do you see them? I'm trying to see. Oh, here we go. I figured it out.
Can everyone see the results? I'm not sure what everyone sees there. All right.
Yes.
And by the way, it's anonymous. No one can see. I can't see. Just to let you know, I can't see the results, so it's all anonymous. So if you're submitting your results, no one can see who responds. All anonymous.
So far, it looks like the millennials are the primary. Oh, very interesting. The millennials, followed by Gen X, are the primary people we have here today. So it's interesting that that's the answer, because the millennials are the largest number of people that entered the workforce at one time. So the majority of our workforce is going to be definitely populated with millennials. So that is interesting. Okay. And then our next poll question, so let's see, we have about 32 responses, which is about the people on the screen. The second poll question we'll go to Anita is age bias in the workplace. Do you believe it's a significant issue, a moderate issue, a minor issue, not an issue, or are you unsure? Coming in, they're coming in. So as they come in, it looks like the majority right now is a moderate issue. I think I would tend to agree with that. I do think it's a moderate issue, and we're gonna look a little bit deeper at the different generations. So for example, with the baby boomer generation, I don't want to, I'm going to skip traditionalists, not because I don't have respect for that generation, but because I think that, the majority of us here probably don't work with that generation consistently. Although there was a lawyer that worked for the Commonwealth who retired after working for 50 years, who was a part of this generation. So, it's very possible, but most typically we do not work with someone of that generation. So when we're talking about the boomer generation, I was briefly speaking before about how they're motivated by company, loyalty, teamwork, and a duty. This generation of baby boomers really values hierarchy. So you're going to see kind of in that generation that where a person falls in the workplace is going to really play a role on how the boomers respect them or communicate with them or value them. It's very important for that generation. Are we good? Okay. Again, they're accustomed to a more collaborative approach. So the baby boomer generation is really going to like the idea of sitting with the other individuals in their organization and figuring out a way to get best do the work, whether that's the most efficient way, the most economical way, or the way that just makes the most sense. They're really going to want this collaborative approach of everyone is going to be pulling their own weight, but bringing something to the table. Their communication tip for individuals in this generation is really to approach it with respect. This is a generation that has a high value of respect. That means respect in communication. So for someone from this generation, they might view it as disrespect for someone from a younger generation to ignore an email, whereas an individual from a younger generation might suspect that no response was needed for the email. I've been told this, I'll do this. But someone from the older generation is going to value the communication be reciprocated, whether that's just simply a got it, okay, I'll get it done. And it's a sign of respect for them. So respecting and respect in that generation is high. It's a high value for them. So then we're moving on and we look at the Generation X professionals, which I think in our group was our second highest category here. They're known as the sandwich generation because they have pressure from the top and the bottom, so to speak. They have the pressure from the boomer generation that was in the workforce before them. And they also then have pressure from the millennials that are kind of coming up after them. So there's this feeling of, not only do I need to elevate, but am I going to be pushed out? So they're looked at as the sandwich generation. They really value independence and autonomy. And that, I think, comes from the pressure that they feel. They want to get the work done and they want to do it in the way that best suits them. I mentioned before, they're really motivated by that work-life balance. They are the generation that I think the idea of diversity in the workplace was very important to them. And kind of in talking to some various people that come from different generations, my parent generation of baby boomers, diversity wasn't necessarily a thing in the workplace because these are individuals that are coming from a civil rights era or have lived through a civil rights era. So for them, the ability to work was just kind of the focus, right? The ability to get a job was kind of the focus. But you really see this next generation that's coming up and they're saying, well, there's a lot of value in bringing people from different backgrounds, ideas into one space, right? So this is a generation that really started promoting the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that Generation X. And for them, a communication tip with communicating with someone from this generation is take the pressure off of them. They don't like for you to come to them and say, help me, or what should I do? They want them to come to say, how can I offer help to you, right? Because they're getting the work done. So come to them with a solution, not necessarily always a problem. Or if there is a problem, maybe some suggestions on a solution that goes with the problem that they're seeking to fix. So they like the communication to take the pressure off them, that generation. Oh, so I see some comments. Gen X was in school when our teachers just went through the civil rights movement. We grew up knowing, or at least having great examples of what was right and wrong. That I think is a great point, because you're dealing with individuals. The Gen X generation really was the first generation post civil rights and some of those things. So you had either parents or, like you said, teachers or other individuals that really had that firsthand experience and hearing about the experiences that in those individuals face, not just even from an aspect of um, struggles in the diverse communities, whether that be race, but also gender. So you definitely saw increase in women feeling more comfortable in the workplace when you're getting to the Generation X generation, and women working and not staying at home more. So that also is motivated to the work-life balance and needing to still be able to go to work and feel like you're focused on your career, but also balance that with having to take care of your family as well. And then we have the millennials. Again, I said they were competitive. They value self-expression. The millennial generation has this really strong desire for coaching and feedback that can often be mistaken for hand-holding. So I think the older generation sometimes get it. There's a misconception that millennials need their hands to be held, but really the millennial generation is looking for growth. This is really a generation that like enters an organization with the idea that like, how is this going to be a journey for me of whether it be personal, professional growth? And this is the generation that is like really taking the opportunities for feedback. They value feedback. As a millennial, I can say for myself, I really value feedback. And that doesn't mean positive feedback. That means any feedback. I really want to know how I'm doing, but I'm also embracing opportunities to learn more. I'm a person that probably puts too much on my plate because I always want to learn. I'm always taking another class or going to this or asking my boss, hey, can I go to this training? Or can I shadow you on this, just because I want to soak it all up? Like the millennials are really like sponges, I think, and they want to soak up all of that, all of the education and how we can progress forward. That's a big thing in this generation that you'll see. And you'll really see in the millennial generation that when they approached career, it was more purpose driven than the prior generations. So it was embracing the idea that what career can I enter? What space can I enter in my career that is about what I can do to better my community, better society, or better, my environment, even. So that generation is really more purpose driven in their career focus. A communication tip for dealing with the millennial generation is asking for their opinion. Millennials like their ideas to be valued. We want to be at the brainstorming table. We don't just want to be given the marching orders to execute. So when dealing with millennial generation, include them in those conversations, right? About if they're going to be doing the work, they kind of want to be a part of the planning process of the work. They need to feel like they have the buy-in and what they're doing. So that's communication tip for millennials. And then Gen Z. This is our, like I said, global entrepreneurial progressive. They value speed and fun. So technology has always been at their fingertips. So this is generation that will prefer probably to text you than email or call or use a chat function on Teams or whatever communication platform you use at your workplace. They want fast communication. This generation also is what's the word I'm looking for? They value frequent feedback as well, and they also value acknowledgement and praise. They want to be lifted up. They want to feel congratulated. They want their work to be acknowledged for what they're doing. And I think they're also motivated a lot by creativity. And you see the creativity and self-expression that they value sometimes translate into physical appearance. So this is really a generation that dress codes for them are loose and not a thing. So from personal experience, I now have the pleasure of, I'm our intern coordinator at my agency. So I supervise legal interns throughout the year, fall, spring, and summer. I had an intern a couple of summers ago who showed up to work dressed like Napoleon Dynamite. And so part of me was like appalled as a millennial, I'm a millennial, I'm progressive, right? So part of me was appalled, but then I had to look introspectively and say, well, but did I tell him how he was supposed to come to work dressed? I assumed that that when you come to work, that you should dress a certain way. That's me. That's my own stereotype and bias of what I think people should come to in the workplace. And our office is very lax. We're kind of like a business casual office. But that, even for me, I was like, oh, okay. So, but for him, I had to keep in mind too that generation, they spent a large chunk of their several years in COVID, where their only means of showing up was through a screen, whether that be to a school or even a job interview. So for them, showing up physically to the office, foreign concept, right? So I think that was really a message for me to think to myself, okay, so I have to change my approach, right? I'm dealing with a certain set of individuals that might have different expectations. And for me, that means I have to communicate clearly. Instead of just saying, oh my God, like, why would you come to work dressed like that? It's more of, I should communicate, this is what the expectation is. So I had to say, hey, FYI, in the office, we kind of have a business casual attire dress code. If we're going to court or we're going to do something else, then you need to be a business professional. And here are some suggestions for that, right? So that's just something that I had to learn as a tip, because they really value, self-expression or individuality. I work with an attorney in another agency. She changes her hair color on a monthly basis. It was green for Christmas. It was orange for the Halloween holiday. It will probably be pink or red for Valentine's Day. That is the way she expresses herself. And I think that sometimes older generations view that in a way that is kind of maybe not in the most positive way, but at the end of the day, her hair color does not dictate her intelligence. It does not dictate what she brings to the table. It does not affect how she approaches her work and that she's a brilliant attorney, right? But the perception is that a person who wears pink hair cannot be a lawyer, but that is something I think that we are stepping away from, as you see the generations progress and you see the really generational diversity in the workplace, and you see people embracing the differences and change, and maybe it'll give somebody else more freedom or the confidence to express themselves in a different way, that they wouldn't necessarily do. So those are just kind of some of like the basics, going through those. Now, getting more into the communication challenges we face across the generations. Let me go to poll question number 3 first, which is, which generation do you most collaborate with at work? So Anita's going to pop that on the screen. So do you mostly work with your own generation, older generations, a mix, or a younger generation? So the majority say a mix of all generations, followed by, it looks like, mostly older generations. So I think when you're dealing, a mix of all generations is interesting, because you're dealing with people that all require different things or expect different things. So it really is an opportunity to, I think, really foster some interesting dialogue across your organizations when you're dealing with people of multi-generations. But I think one of the main challenges when you're talking about a multi-generational workplace is communication style. Face-to-face versus email versus text message versus silence. You have some generations, an older generation, who might not feel the need to talk about everything. Things happen, we move on. We don't need to discuss it. Whereas, millennials, Gen Z, they want to have direct communication. They really value that feedback, that they really value the feedback and hearing more or talking about the issue or getting to the heart of the problem. So this is what kind of leads us into what we might call an uncomfortable or a difficult conversation. So I had a personal experience where I started working for the Parole Board in 2016. At the time, I was 20, how old was I? 26 years old, almost 27 years old. And a year into my position here, I had to start supervising an individual who was 60 years old. So you can imagine I was millennial, baby boomer, vast age difference at the time. He greatly struggled doing anything that I told him to do, oftentimes verbally pushing back. I can remember a time where his role required him to make copies and put together. We had a lot of documents that had to be put together for a case. They had to be organized a certain way. And I was like, hey, this is how you need to do it. You have to make copies. You have to index it like this. And he was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing all that copying. Well, it's part of your job. And, he was very adamant about not doing that, or only doing the things that he wanted to do. And so that really was a very, very foreign concept to me at 26 and having really just entered the workforce. How am I going to deal with this person in a way that is going to be constructive and, not combative, right? He's the same age as my parents. So for me, as a millennial, even though I was a supervisor, I had this inherent sense of respect for him as an older adult, because that's how I was raised, was to have respect for individuals that were older than me. But at the same time, he needed to respect me as his supervisor. So that was interesting in how to navigate that. So in doing so, I had to talk to my parents. I said, listen, I need some advice here. I went to my dad. I said, this man's the same age as you. How do I deal with it? My mom had supervised people for many years. I asked her for the advice as well. And they both said, stand firm in what you want and communicate with him in a way but you do not have to be disrespectful. You do not have to be defensive. You just have to be matter of fact and have the direct conversation. So I didn't email. I set up a meeting with him, myself, and my supervisor, and we sat in a room, and I said, listen, I understand that this might not be your ideal work. This is one case where this is requiring some grunt work. This is what I need you to do to be successful in this case. This is what I've asked you to do. And if you have a problem with doing that, then you might have a problem with doing your job. And we can't work that way. And it was, I think, the directness of the communication, which really caused him to pause and say, okay, well, wait a second here, let's have this conversation. And so we had a little back and forth dialogue. And after that one conversation we had, and I listened to him, and I also said to him, I said, is there a different way in which I could have asked you to do this? Did you have a problem with the way I asked you to do this? To see if there was a way that we could better foster our communication. And he said that he would have rather me explain to him exactly why it needed to be done in that way. And I said, that's fair. So we had that communication, we hashed that out. From that point forward, we were able to have a perfectly fine working relationship, because I understood that when I'm asking him to do something, he needed more of an explanation of why. I also recognized that he valued a little bit more autonomy, because even though I was supervising him, he had worked for a long time. So I had to remember that he has a lot of work experiences. So I would ask him to do things that were above his job title or qualifications, because I knew he was capable of that, given the work experiences that he had. So I think that was able for us to foster a better and cohesive working environment. So I think when you're talking about those difficult conversations, you really have to approach it from a way that is beneficial for most people. So switching gears a little bit, we're not just talking about difficult conversations in the workplace, but when your difficult conversations generally in the workplace can come up around non-workplace related issues. We live in a world where, because I think the internet is so accessible and information is so accessible, real life is happening in real time while you're at work. And it's hard to escape that. There is no escape from that. So this is navigating a totally different environment, especially when you add social media into it. So one thing that I've noticed is that various levels of generations do not like to talk about certain topics in the workplace. Older generations are very, very, listen, I come to work to do work. I don't want to talk about my personal life. I don't want to hear about yours. I don't want to talk about politics if we don't work in a political environment. I don't want to talk about those things. But I think for younger generations, their entire lives are lived sometimes on the internet. So there is more of a need to maybe come to work and talk about those things. And so that becomes also can become uncomfortable for people. So how do you do that? And another personal example I have here is during COVID, as we all know, in May of 2020, we watched George Floyd killed on national television, right? We were all isolated at that moment. I was at home working from home. I hadn't seen or any spoken, I hadn't seen anybody in my office for 3 months. My boss would check in from time to time. But this is something that issue was deeply personal for me. It was deeply troubling to me. And my boss called me, and he's the Gen X generation, and he called me, and he's also of a different racial background, different life experience background. And he called me and he said, I don't really know what to say to you. So I'm just going to ask you, are you okay? That one thing that he said to me was incredibly impactful because it gave me the space to talk about what I needed to talk about, because he opened the door for me to talk about it. So I didn't feel uncomfortable, right? You're calling me to ask me. So I don't feel uncomfortable talking about this, even though we're in a work environment and it's just you and I. So sometimes if there's something like that happening, the best way is to isolate, right? So if you don't need to tell your whole office what you're going through, but maybe create a safe space, or there's someone there that's a safe space to have that dialogue and that communication. One way I create a boundary too, I have a strict rule. I do not social media with anybody I work with. Nobody that I work with is my Facebook friend or my Instagram friend. That is my one rule. I love these people dearly, but I spend the majority of my life with you. You do not now need to see what I'm doing when I'm not here. You do not now need to analyze my Facebook posts or my Instagram stories, because you come to work and you hear people talking about, did you see what so-and-so posted on Facebook? I'm like, this is exactly why I keep those things separate. But I do know that I do have a safe place here when I am going through things to have those conversations at work, but to do it in a way that is comfortable for me, even when those are uncomfortable situations. So I think it's always important to create those boundaries and those safe places for each other. And some tips for managing kind of those uncomfortable conversations are: identify what the core issue is. So if we're talking about a workplace issue, if you have an individual who you supervise or vice versa, and there is an issue that you're having with them at work, a work-related function, identify what the core issue is. Have a conversation with them. Do not blindside them. Maybe the topic of the conversation should be disclosed before the conversation. The worst thing in the world, I think, for anybody to receive of any generation is an email that just says, we need to talk, or we might need to discuss. So have set up the core issue, identify what that core issue is prior to the meeting. Anticipate reactions. Having a good understanding or read on your colleagues, I think, is so important when you're approaching any uncomfortable conversation, especially in the workplace. Have a good read on your colleagues. If you know that a particular person is maybe more sensitive, or on how they handle things, don't have an uncomfortable conversation with them or bring up a workplace issue with them in a large group setting, right? That's probably not the best way to approach that. And as I said earlier, the millennial generation and the Gen Z, they value that feedback. They value direct communication. So if you're going to have a difficult conversation or uncomfortable conversation with them about workplace, whether it be performance or an issue, come to that conversation with a concrete example. Don't just say, we're having problems with your work. Say, hi, like, let's have a conversation. On this date, you drafted this memo. This memo had several typographical errors, several inconsistent, facts were in this memo. We need to talk about this. Like, don't just say, we're not happy with your work. Be concrete in those examples. Bring the context to that conversation. The other thing that's going to be super important in having those difficult conversations, in addition to just understanding your audience, anticipating their reactions, you can bounce those things off of somebody else you're speaking before you have that difficult conversation with your colleagues. Go to another trusted colleague or a mentor and get constructive feedback on what you're planning to say before you actually say it. And that often goes along with trying to separate those in conversations in a high tension environment. Create some space before that conversation is had. If it's going to create a lot of tension, or it's a highly emotional thing, create the space there and bounce that idea off of someone else before you approach it with them. Time and place are very important. Private information, it should be a private conversation, not a public occurrence. Empathy, active listening, and not just listening to respond, but listening to understand. I think that is important to every generation, every individual that communicates. Active listening. So when you're having a conversation with someone, whether you're providing positive feedback or negative feedback, I think it's so important for the person delivering the information to also be an active listener as well as an active communicator, right? So those are some important things to remember. Find common ground, or a cordial way to say, we can agree but disagree. Not everything needs to be a fight or a battle. And this idea of psychological safety. I often hear the older people in my family talk about how the younger generations are, we're too sensitive, right? We're the generations of the participation trophy, especially the Generation Z. That is the stereotype that they can't handle it, right? Everything is too tough for them. It's too hard. I think that's a way, instead of having that approach, think about a way that you have to deliver critical feedback in a constructive way. So instead of creating a hurt feeling situation that could create hurt and divisiveness, look at the feedback as a way, how can I get to tell this person that I value their growth? And so I'm bringing this information to them because I think that they have the ability to do better, and I want to foster that, right? So instead of just being harsh, or thinking that someone is too sensitive, oftentimes it's just that person doesn't receive communication in that way, and we have to tailor it to that. So my fourth poll question: which factor most influences your engagement at work? So Anita's going to put that on the screen. I see so many great comments in the chat. This is awesome.
Yeah, I do too. I knew this will be great. This is the poll question, right?
Yes. Which factor most influences your engagement at work? Your job stability, your compensation and benefits, your career growth, your purpose, meaning, or flexibility. So which factor most influences your engagement at work? People said purpose and meaning. Oh, that's awesome. Yes, that is great. Purpose and meaning. And so it's interesting that is the overall response. And it kind of coincides with the fact that I believe the majority of people here were millennials. And that is one of the categories, that is one of the characteristics of millennials, is that they really are driven by purpose in the work that they're doing versus the compensation or benefits or the even, job stability. They're really driven by doing something that matters. Very interesting. So that kind of correlates with what we're doing. And then our last poll question is, what is your preferred communication style at work? Is it face-to-face, email, chat messaging, video meetings? Someone said, my engagement is influenced by the tasks that I need to do. I'm hired to do the job. If the job requires engagement, there I am. Interesting. By the task I need to do. So Angelina, it sounds like you're more driven. Just lost your comment. Oh, there we go. It sounds like you're more driven by duty. Is that right? Duty to the job you're doing? Duty to the work? Yep, you do sound like a boomer. But I guess you're not. So yes, you're driven to your duty. Were you raised by boomers? That would be my question. Were you raised by boomers? Because that would then make sense. Depends on if you're talking about work communication or collaborative communication. That is a great point, Rick. So I guess the communication will be tailored differently depending on what the interaction is. And I see Cheryl said, if it's a phone call that can be handled by an email, please email. Yes. Yep. If it's a phone call that can be handled by email, please email. Yes. I think that is, Cheryl, what generation are you?
I am a millennial.
Yes. So I think the millennial generation, we have this big concept of don't waste my time. So that feeds into that comment as well. I don't want my time to be wasted. So don't take up my time on the phone if you could have just simply sent an email. So that makes perfect sense. Please use Teams. Please call me. Too much can go wrong with reading into an email's tone. That is also a great point that Christopher brought up, is that sometimes there's a lot lost in translation when you are communicating with someone via email. Gen X makes perfect sense. There's a lot that can go lost. I know that when email chains get particularly long at work, my Gen X boss often says we need to have a meeting, because there's a lot going on back and forth through email, and now we're getting lost in translation. A lot of things, another thing that can get lost in translation, like Christopher said, is the tone of an email. Sometimes how someone is communicating via email can come off as harsh, when simply they're just giving a shorthand answer, and that can be perceived as being harsh or negative in some way. So yes, it looks like there's various degree. Let's see. Depends on the message to be communicated. While emails more efficient, sometimes more sensitive matters should be face to face. Pretty sure that was written by my mom, who's in this Zoom or Teams meeting. So yes, I would agree with that.
Mine too.
That is awesome. Okay, so I want to give some takeaways here before we go to question and answer. So I think that my core message is to find the strength in multi-generational differences. Utilize mentoring and reverse, or what they call mutual mentoring, in a way that can really be cohesive to your organization. Pair people of younger generation with older, so that they can, like the movie The Intern, they can really benefit from each other and from those experiences. This also will help in organizations where, I'm sure we all have worked with people, or we work in places where we in a meeting and someone asks, well, why do we do it this way? And the response is, well, we've always done it that way. And instead of looking at that as negative, this really kind of coincides with the quote that Anita read. We didn't plan this, but the quote that she read at the beginning of the meeting was, you really have to reach back to go forward. So when someone might say, well, that's the way we've always done it, instead of meeting that with a negative response, meet that with, well, tell me why that's the way you've always done it. Because there might be a hidden gem into the longevity of the function and how it was done that can really give brainstorming to how we can be more efficient in the future, right? So use that as an opportunity for learning, as opposed for like, well, why do we do it? Why do we do it that way? Don't always shrug those things off. Generational diversity is a really good thing. It's a positive thing. The goal to always remember is how we can shift the landscape from managing generational differences to focus on leveraging generational strengths. So that is my message. So I will open it up to questions and leave it there.
Thank you, Attorney Morgan Davis. I do want to say this before we go into the questions and answers, because I know, it's amazing. I do want to thank Director Griffin for recommending you to be here today. And I just want to just let you know that when we do any of our virtual outreach in our series here, it's because of our PHRC family, who sends us amazing recommendations of our scholars and who have, our topics of interest. So, we want to tell you, if you have scholars or these topics that will be of interest to our social justice themes here, please send them to me. Send them to us so that we can reach out. So Director Griffin, thank you so much for
Thank you.
introducing
Thank
us
you so much, Director
to
Griffin. Thank you.
Yes. So thank you. And, let's see here. What do we have here in the chat? I know one of the questions I was asked was, what were some of the difficulties that we've had? And I think you've already spoken to that, is some of our cross-generational communications that we've had. And you even speaking to some of the issues and concerns and highlights and some of the pros and cons that we have with each generation really speaks to that. Because within our work, we have a lot of that cross-generational communication. But we do have some information here. Someone saying this is great. ADHD body language assess. I like to see body language. But there was one particular question in here. Who determines the names of these generational span periods, like the traditionalists? I don't know if you would know that answer. And baby boomers, Generation X.
I don't know. I don't know who is the originator of them, because like traditionalists are also known as the silent generation. And so I don't know if these are like, some like scholarly people somewhere who developed the names of them. Because I mean, we went from like, now we're at Generation Z. I think the next one also has I have to look it up. It has an interesting name. Because so I don't know who comes up with them, because other than like the millennials obviously is garnered by the turn of the millennium, right? So these are individuals until the 2000 was the turn of the like millennium. I'm not sure. Baby boomers, I think, was a function of the high rate of people being born during those years. So I think that's where the name garnered. I think the name is garnered like after the generation exists, if that makes sense. Like they come up with the name after it's completed. Oh, Generation Alpha, that's right. Which I'll have to figure out why. Yeah.
They seem to be around 15-year intervals as well.
Yes. 15
to 16-year intervals. So that's interesting.
Yes, which is it's different. And because of the spans of the generations, you can you have so much even within those spaces, right? So like Generation X, 45 to 60. So like a 45-year-old and a 60-year-old have very different life experiences, or just even experiences with technology, or the world, even things that they've seen. So even within the generation, you have those breakdowns of the differences within them. So you'll see that all individuals of Gen X are not the same. Even millennials, you have older millennials who are going to be vastly different than someone who's 44 and 25. You could have those. That's a huge range. The millennial.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah,
yes, they have children in different generations. My oldest is a millennial and my youngest is a Gen Z. And Adrian, you probably see so many differences between those children that it's probably startling.
Oh my God, yes. Oh my Lord, yes. The communication style is different. The ambition is different. The task orientation is different. My communication with each of them has to be different. Yeah, it's completely different.
Yeah.
Do you think this presentation will help you to communicate with them differently, or maybe help find a communication style?
Yeah, this was a topic of conversation that Director Griffith and I had some time ago, and I'm glad that she followed through, because we look at the workforce within the PHRC, and we see the different generations, and it's nice to know. And I think you did an expert job of going through the different generations and their communication styles, their attention, how to communicate with them, what kind of communication style they need, what motivates them. All of these are very important attributes that we, as senior leaders in another generation, should know, so that we can make sure that we're working with all workforce to ensure their success. So I thank you for that. And yes, to answer your question, absolutely, OC levels, I think this is very helpful.
Thank you so much, Adrian, for that feedback.
Great. I remember I think I was speaking with you before, because we've spoken a lot up to today. So I just so appreciate you being here today. We were speaking about just even how generations respond to just in general, but in particular to email, how there are some generations who will respond to email, and then there are some generations, in particular, those millennials. I'm not a millennial, I'm considered a Gen X. They don't respond to email, but they'll do the task. But they may not necessarily respond to the email, but they'll do the task. But, typically Gen X will respond, but millennials may not. And so that was something that really helped me to understand communication and style in that way too. So
sometimes I think that goes to the competitive thing too. Like millennials, like we got to get it done, and we got to get it done fast, and we got to be the best. So it's like let me get the work done, and when I'm done, I'll be like, here, it's done. So yes, but I think sometimes that goes to that goes to communication piece. So I had a similar experience where it's like when I'm supervising the interns, I do like them to communicate. So because some days they're in the office, some days they're remote. So I just had to say, hey, if I send you an email, it's helpful if you just send me a text, say, hey, got your email, working on it. Like if you don't want to email me, text me, that's fine. So I'll meet you where you are. But I do need to know that you're receiving what I'm saying, especially in the world of remote, right? Because we're not in the office every day. I don't see you every day. So there's this distrust sometimes, I think, with this remote work that's are the people actually working? So sometimes a basic text oh, hey, I'm working on your email.
Right. It's helpful. And I think you mentioned that, just the direct communication going straight there. And once again, Attorney Davis Edwards, this was so very helpful. Thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate it. I'm going to miss our correspondence back and forth, but it was so good for you being with us. And again, Director Griffin, thank you so much for recommending. And I will just say to everyone, if you have any other recommendations, let us know. Do you have any anything? Feel free. I think you already did.
I did. I think we should all just continue to embrace the generational differences. I find it to be I think it's so impactful that I get to learn from people both younger and older than me on a daily basis. And it's really something that can be valued and shared. So just keep that in mind.
Yes. Thank you so much. Our next, it won't be our Lunch and Learn. We're now pivoting into our Diversity Speaks, which will be January the 29th, Thursday, and we'll have Dr. Cayenne O'Connor from the University of Pittsburgh. She'll be speaking on intersecting legacies, racism's enduring impact, community health, and mental health disparities. So we hope that you all join us there on that Thursday, January 29th. Thank you all for this invigorating, engaging conversation. Thank you again, Attorney Davis Edwards, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Have a good rest of the day, everyone.